Hi everyone, Michelle Dillinger here with a short mini training. Today's topic is internet safety for kids. Now, if you're new here or you haven't watched any of the videos on my feed, I record these mini trainings exclusively for the members of the Your Village Community Facebook group. If you're interested in joining the Facebook group, there's a link to join in the show notes of today's video. The topic today, internet safety for kids, cannot be overstated in its importance. And our guest today, Johnson Ifediri, talks to us about things you can do whenever you're watching this video. Now, what I mean by that is that we all know the internet changes every single day. So an app or a parental control setting that worked today may not work a week from now. So I spoke to Johnson and I asked him specifically, give me tips and tricks that parents can use whether they're watching the video the same day we recorded it or a year into the future. Things that are universal, that parents of children of all ages can use to help ensure their children's safety online. If you'd like to connect with either me or Johnson, our contact information is also in the show notes of today's video, as long as some free downloadable resources that we put together for you. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's mini training. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's mini training called Internet Safety for Kids. And with me, I have Johnson Ifediri. Johnson is a cybersecurity thought leader with Derry Jones LLC, and he has a background in threat intelligence. Johnson, wow, that's cool. And I love that we're talking about internet safety today because I have 3 kids myself, 6, 4, and 1. And while they have limited access to the internet, I can tell every day they're starting to dig a little deeper. They want this app or they want to watch that video. And I haven't delved into YouTube yet, but my 6-year-old knows it exists and wants it. So my first question for you is, at what age do we parents need to begin worrying about internet safety?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I really appreciate it. It's good to speak to you today. Personally, I do not think that there's a specific age where a child has to be taught these things. I think because the simple reason is that children develop differently. There are some 2 years old who knows a lot more than some 4 years old. So it quite depends on the development of your child. If you put a nail on it, on which age you struggle to deal with that, to know, because each children develop differently. But I think personally for me is I tell parents, what I say is, as soon as your child can pick up your phone, put a password in it, and navigate the internet on their own right there, that is the time you start teaching them about internet safety. Because right now they can do it without you. You can think you're watching, but you might not always be there. So that's what I think. I think that is the right time you start teaching them. But here's the problem with that also. Some parents come to me and say, you know what, I want to teach my kids about this stuff, about internet safety. But when they are too young, how do I teach them and not kind of steal their innocence? Like pornography, for example. I talk to my child about pornography without actually,
Right. You don't
steal
want
their
to scare
childhood.
them or
Yes,
traumatize them.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. How do I do that? And the age at which children have access to such materials these days is reducing. Sometimes 6 years old
Oh my gosh.
can see such materials online, and we all know the effect these things has on adults, let alone children. So I'll just say it this way: Solomon in the Bible has to get married to 700 wives and have 300 concubines in order to see 1,000 naked women. A child with a phone can do that in a few hours.
Oh, wow. I've never
That's
thought
how,
about it that way. That's
yeah, I mean, that's how
hilarious.
dangerous. That's the world we live in right now. That's how, I mean, it's off the chart right now. So parents are worried, and rightly so. How do we keep these kids safe? Why we don't kind of scare them or take away their childhood? And for example, I say you have to be creative in how you do it. When you are very young, you can't be blunt with it. You have to be you have to be creative. For example, if you have to talk to a child about pornography when they are still young, for 4 years old, for example, For me, I said this is what you do. If I'm sitting with my son right now, my daughter, I said, "Hey, baby, you know how we in this family we do like to take pictures, right?" And the child just said, "Yes." You said, "Okay. It is important to know that we don't take pictures of people without their clothes on. In the same way, we cannot look at pictures or videos of people without their clothes because it exposes their private parts, and private parts are private." So I kind of leave the conversation there. That conversation cannot be developed and built up when they grow older, but they have the basic foundation right now that you
Right.
shouldn't be looking at people without clothes. It's not good at all. That's a no-no.
Right.
So
So,
that's
an
it. I think
age
that's a good starting
appropriate
point.
conversation with your
Absolutely.
children that introduces them to the concepts of what is okay according to your household and what is not okay,
Absolutely.
without introducing them to necessarily topics that are scary or
Absolutely.
traumatizing or too grown up for them at really
Yes.
young ages. Okay,
Yes.
that makes sense. And I know you mentioned when a child can go in and use your password and navigate to the internet. What about if they can use your password and navigate to, say, Amazon or a Facebook app or something? Is that something we need to be concerned about or limiting? I mean, I don't want my kid going on and spending $1,000 on, marbles or something, obviously, but it feels safer than, say, going on to a Google search, maybe. Are there certain apps or certain websites or certain places online that we should be restricting access to more so than others? Or is it best practice really to just say, I'm going to put in a password they can't crack and my kid's never getting into my phone?
Well, that will help if you don't have a child that is smart enough to crack your part. It only takes time. They have to see you do it once, and sometimes they don't have to ask you. They know the password, or else
I
you have to keep changing it in
I
order
do
to.
remember looking over my parents' shoulder as a kid to get there. The big computer that sat in the living room, like next to the TV, and the whole family used the same dial-up internet connection. And I got that password. So that's a good point. They'll probably get in.
Yeah, and that's when parenting was easy. Today it's more difficult because there are a lot of variables that are involved right now. So in terms of purchasing something online, I think that's quite easy. Amazon or most of this platform has the ability for you to authenticate twice if you want to purchase something. So you can turn that on so that they can do that. So they can go past there. But if they have to go online to go and browse and do all that, first you don't want them to do that with your phone because the security parameters that you have to implement to protect them, you're going to be protecting, you're going to be using it against yourself as well. So if you talk about browsing, for example, if you turn on private setting in browsing, it will work for the case, but it will not work for you. There are some things you want to check
Mm.
and you'll be restricted as well. I don't think they should have such access to your phone, but if they do, it should be limited. It shouldn't be that far because you are going to be putting controls on your phone that is going to restrict you as well. If you are down for that, I think that's a good idea as well. Otherwise, when you give them a phone, these are some of the parental control. These are some of the privacy settings that you should put in place on their phone in order to protect them.
Yeah, so if they're old enough to have their own phone, then it makes sense to use those privacy settings, those parental
Absolutely,
controls. Is
absolutely.
there, in your opinion, is there sort of a line between a child who wants to have that independence, but also, let's talk about maybe a 10-year-old. A 10-year-old wants that extra independence, but you don't necessarily want them to have free reign of the internet. What's something a parent
Absolutely.
can do to make sure that their child can't just log on at 2 o'clock in the morning and be browsing some, I don't know what it's called, some dark web website, and seeing things that they shouldn't be, or watching things, or interacting with maybe bad people?
Okay, I think for a 10-year-old, the first thing you want to do, first of all, no child should be with a phone at 2 a.m. That's it. I mean, if you see that, you should be taking away that phone away. Because what I tell parents, if you have to give a child a phone, like a 10 years old, so they will have that phone on their own without you most of the time. You want to set an agreement, what I call an agreement. And like your audience, like if they want one, I could email one to them, or you can go online, you can find an example of an agreement to the child, where you set the rules of the game. If you give them the phone and take it back to say, come on, to give an agreement right now, it's not going to work. Before you give them the phone, you have to make a clear agreement that this is what it is. You can't use this phone after bedtime, after dinner at night. When you go to bed, you can't use this phone at that time. You can't send images of yourself to someone with this phone. You can't do this, you can't do that. You want to set the do and don'ts. You want to make it clear, and you want to state the penalties for flouting the rules. You want to make it clear and let it be known right there, so that when something goes wrong, the charge is, it's like the rule already. You know what goes on. You know what happens when you do this. So you want to set the rule of the game early enough so that nobody's confused about that. If you have that settled, now you want to put in maybe parental control apps that tells you what the child is doing, because you can't just go and say, give me the phone, let me see all the time. You want to be able to be in the house, and the parental control app gives you an update of what's going on, what he or she is doing while you are not there. If they browse a certain website, it lets you know. If they are navigating certain parts of the internet that might be dangerous, it stops them from going there, and also informs you that this is what is happening. And that could also be what I call a teaching moment in terms of online safety when they come to you, or when you are discussing with them and all that. So when you first, you have the agreement in place, you have the parental control in place. Secondly, you want to have a good conversation. You have to always have a conversation with them so that they can trust you.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So before they get access to the phone, you have rules of engagement. You have rules of your household in place that have been discussed up front. No phones after bed, for example, or after dinner, or whatever works for your household. You have those in place before the child receives the phone. And then once they do have the phone, there are parental controls on it that stop them from getting into tricky or dangerous places of the internet. And I won't mention any specific apps, because I know by this time next week, the app that works today will be on to another app. So we'll keep it general. But then I love that you mentioned that third step, which is that when your child inevitably does come to you and say, I got blocked from this website or this social media platform. Why? I want to be a part of Facebook. I want to be on TikTok, whatever it is next week. That is a teachable moment. That is the catalyst for you as a parent to have a conversation about internet safety. So it's not all just you lecturing your child, don't go here, don't do this, don't do that. It's your child who actually comes to you. And then you can use that as that moment to have the conversation. That's brilliant, because I feel like that is less authoritarian. It gives your child the flexibility to bump up against those boundaries on their own, and then to come back to you for the conversation. So they're actually initiating the conversation, rather than it feeling like you as the parent always saying no. So I think that's brilliant advice.
The most important part of that conversation is because you want them to be able to trust you. And when they trust you, want them to be able to come to you when they have a problem, or when they see something inappropriate online. Because it's not if your child is going to see pornographic material, it's when. So when that happens, they should come to you. Like what happens when I go out in advisory role to advise some small companies how to protect their assets. I tell them that an hacker in China somewhere can penetrate your system. Maybe there's nothing you can do about that. But detection is a must. You should be able to know when it has happened. So if you have a child and something is going wrong, you might not be able to stop something from happening, but you need to know when it's happening so that you can do something about it.
That's so important. I'm so glad you said that. It's not if, it's when. because in this day and age, you're right, every child is going to run up against something online that we don't want them to at some point, that isn't age appropriate or that isn't safe. And you want them to have the trust to come to you when that happens. And by allowing them to bump up against those boundaries on their own, it sets that precedent of them coming to you when something is happening online. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. So if you could give parents one piece of advice as it relates to social media, I know all the kids these days are on all the platforms. There are social media platforms out there that I haven't even heard of. And I'm sure that there are kids on it. So
me too, and
what do
I'm
parents
the
need to
expert,
know?
so that tells you everything.
Yes, right? There you go. So what is it? If you could tell parents one thing about social media safety, what would it be?
Man, social media. I mean, it's difficult for adults, let alone children. It's a
Exactly.
platform where people showcase the best parts of their lives and gives you a false sense of a false sense of reality of what life truly is. And if adults struggle with this, we can only imagine what it does to kids as well in terms of the unrealistic expectations sometimes about life. But what I would say is, apart from having most social media sites has privacy control, you want to take advantage of that. You don't want people to be able to contact them. You want them to be able to contact people, not the other way around. You don't want a pedophile somewhere acting like a child to be able to contact them. You want them to be parameters to prevent that from happening, which the privacy settings can put in place. People shouldn't be able to just search for them. You have to take yourself out of that equation. So if you have the privacy settings in place and that is settled, the best, if I have to choose one thing, the one thing I would say is be their role model. How do they say it again? They say talk is cheap. Has children written all over it. They do 90% of what you do and only 10% of what you say. So they are copying you. If you do not want them to be on their phone 24/7, you shouldn't do it. If you don't want them to kind of be overshare information on social media, you don't want that to happen. You don't want your child going to share personal identifiable information online. You shouldn't do it yourself. So if I don't want that, I do not do it myself. So that's the best advice. Be their role model.
That's great advice. Be a role model. And the one that hit me really hard was, if you don't want your kids on your phone 24/7, don't be on your phone 24/7. Guilty as charged. I'm on my phone all the time. I'm constantly connected to it. It's sitting right here next to me because I can't ever be with it, outside of reaching distance. So that was like a dagger to my heart, Johnson. Thank you for that. But it's a fantastic point because you're right. 80%, they do 80% of what they see us do, 90% and only 10% of what we tell them to do. If people, this was just a mini training. So if people want to learn more, if they want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, professionally, if you want to connect with me, I'm on Instagram as Johnson Ifediwe. But if you want to get weekly tips on how to protect your kids online, where you can ask me questions personally and I can respond to you personally as well, then I will advise you subscribe to my newsletter, derryjones.substack.com. If you subscribe, then you can always reach me at any time.
Great. And if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it on the podcast, those links are going to be in the show notes. And if you're watching this in the Facebook group, those links are going to be in the comments. Thank you so much, Johnson, for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's good to see you.
Of course.